Welcome back to Hard Times and True Crimes. You're about to hear Melody give you part 2 to the MacDonald family murders. So if you haven't already, you want to make sure you check out part 1 first. That way you have all the facts, and you can come to your own conclusion on which story you believe.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Are you ready for part 2?
Yes, I've been excited about it. Do you have anything interesting that's happened in the last couple weeks? Gone anywhere, done anything? I know, you can tell about your party that you're about to do.
Oh, yeah. I am getting ready to have a birthday party. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a murder mystery game party that from the 1920s, kind of that Great Gatsby, Roaring 20s era. And you and Curtis are coming. I'm very excited about it.
Me too.
So, yeah, looking forward to that.
I talked about in the last episode about going to the Battleship North Carolina.
Yes.
And then I also got to go to the New River, Camp Geiger or something like that.
Okay.
And it is an air base in North Carolina that my son is stationed at. And so we got to go see the helicopters that he works on, and we got to go get inside one and just see where he works. And it was really interesting.
That is so cool.
Yeah. He's actually getting ready to go to California for 8 weeks to the, like, I guess, you know, the Tom Cruise movie, Top Gun?
Yeah.
So over there at like the Top Gun school, he's going for 8 weeks.
Oh, that is really awesome. Now I'm going to have Highway to the Danger Zone in my head all day. Yeah. But I love it. It's so cool.
Yeah, it was really fun. All right. So
your son, I don't know him well, but he kind of strikes me as the type like Goose and Maverick that would storm the tower.
Yes, exactly. And you know, they all have that little mustache.
Yes. Yeah. So, and that is coming back. Mm-hmm. And so that's funny. I love that.
It is.
Okay. Well, last week I told you part 1 of the Fort Bragg murders. And so I'm going to give a quick recap. And so, spoiler alert, if you haven't listened, stop this one and go back.
Yeah, and even if you've heard this story before, I would really suggest you go back and listen to it, because Melody's given a lot of details that, you know, I knew it a little bit, but I hadn't heard all of the stuff that she's telling us.
Yeah, and in addition to that, there is literally so much. There's no way I could include every bit of evidence and things that they found, so I'm just covering what I can.
Okay.
So if you research this case, you may very well find a lot more stuff that I just couldn't include. So Captain Jeffrey MacDonald at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, woke in the early morning hours of February 17th, 1970, to the screams of his wife and daughter. He was being attacked by a group of 4 intruders who knocked him out and violently beat and stabbed his wife and 2 little girls to death. But in the days after the crime, investigators became suspicious of Jeffrey's version of those events. The scene appeared to be staged to look like druggy hippies had killed, very similar to the Charles Manson murders of Sharon Tate and her friends that had just happened 6 months before. Also noteworthy is that Jeff survived this horrendous attack and seemed to have very few injuries himself. He did have a partially collapsed lung from a small stab wound. In the coming months and then years, Jeffrey faced an Article 32 hearing by the military investigators. The ruling in that hearing was that the evidence was not sufficient to try him, and in part, the evidence was not true. At the end of that episode, all charges in the death of Jeffrey MacDonald's family had been formally dismissed, and he was granted an honorable discharge from the Army. Today, we pick up at that point. Colonel Rock, who had been the one that presided over the Article 32 hearing, he took a lot of flack for his decision to drop those charges. There were rumors around base that, like, his mental capacity was lacking. Others spread rumors that the American Medical Association had gotten to him and convinced him to, like, back off because they didn't want one of their own convicted of something like that. This is where things start to get a little weird. Okay. Not that they weren't already a little weird, but now it gets more. It takes a more weird turn. Jeff begins shopping around for a book deal to tell his side of the story. And
his personality does not surprise me.
I know. He is like the definition of a narcissist. I said earlier off the recording that they probably got their definition of narcissist from him.
Seriously.
He began giving TV interviews.
I saw one of those.
Okay, so you might have seen, did you see the one that aired on CBS?
I don't know. I'm not sure which one. Did he do one with like a late night?
That's the one I'm going to tell you about.
That's the one that I saw.
Okay, so he went on a late night show, and I watched it too. It was the Dick Cavett show. And the Dick Cavett show was like in competition with the Johnny Carson show at that time. And his demeanor on that show was like
bizarre.
He was like smiling, joking around when they were asking him about his events of the night, and he kind of played the joke. He was like, "Well, we were watching a late night show, the Johnny Carson show, and he was on the competitor's show, and the audience laughed, but it was kind of like a real weird, like nervous laugh, like what in the world?"
Yeah.
Who gets up there and makes jokes when you have lost your family in such an awful
your kids way. I mean like it's bad enough your wife, but your little kid, what is funny about that? Why would you even go on a comedy show and talk about that? Right.
I mean, it makes no sense. And it made a lot of people question his innocence, including myself.
Mine too. I was disgusted with him. At that point.
Yeah. And I think probably a lot of people were. And even though that may not prove anything about his innocence or guilt, we do know people handle tragedies differently. I mean, it was not a good look for him. And it was also in that interview, he does publicly once again criticize the Army and accuse them of bungling the case. So he casts blame on them of him being accused in the first place because he just didn't feel like he deserved that. Colette's parents, they were not satisfied with the Army's investigation. They wanted these killers found. And they now felt that the Army was just dropping the case. They could not accept that under any circumstances that they would not pursue this. And so her stepfather, Freddie, he was pushing. He was going to make sure somebody found out who did this to his family. It seemed like he was more interested in finding them than Jeffrey was. He started asking Jeffrey to send him transcripts of that hearing. He wanted to review it himself. He wanted to see what he could find out. He had researchers with Look magazine that were going to help him investigate. But Jeffrey stalled and wouldn't send those transcripts. He just would make excuses about it. After Freddie just continued to just push and push, Jeff, he thought, well, he's not going to give up. I'm going to have to wait to satisfy him. So at this point, Jeff confided something to the Kassabs that was almost hard to believe. He claimed that he had been doing his own investigation and had tracked down one of the guys in the apartment that night, and he and some Green Beret colleagues had beat the man until he had told them everything, and then they had put him 6 feet under.
Huh?
I mean, that is a sensational claim. That he told his father-in-law that he had taken care of one of them and he would not stop until he found the others. And they were kind of thinking, what? And they questioned him a little further and they were like, who was it? They were wanting to know details. It was a very uncomfortable conversation. Eventually, they had to admit to themselves, they just knew he was lying about that.
Yeah.
But why?
I knew he just was the type of person that was going to make himself a hero.
Yes. Yep. Eventually, he ran out of excuses for not sending the transcript, so he finally did have to send it, but he put a time limit on it for them to read it and get it back to him. He's like, well, you can have it, but I need it back by a certain date. But once they read that entire document and they realized what his claims were, they began second-guessing that story. I mean, they were like, we're not sure about that. And so that, along with that bizarre appearance on the Dick Cavett show and then his exaggeration in these interviews, he started exaggerating his injuries. And they knew his injuries weren't that bad.
Right.
His story kind of grew. So their support is starting to waver.
Yeah.
And they were on their way to turning against him. It was in January of 1971, almost a year after the murders, that Freddie Kassab was informed that the CID, Internal Affairs, had formed a panel to reinvestigate the case. And Jeffrey MacDonald was still very much a suspect.
I'm not doing a good job of hiding who
I know.
I think is guilty.
After he had been discharged from the Army, he had returned to New York City, and he had taken up work as a doctor there while all these investigations are going on, and he's going on the talk shows and whatnot. And during this time, the new investigation is going on, and so he is questioned a few more times. They ask him again to take a polygraph, and he refuses, wisely, I will say.
Yeah.
And then they ask him to take a sodium amytal interview. Do you know what that is?
Isn't that like a truth serum?
In the movies we call it like the truth serum.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Wonder Woman and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't actually make you tell the truth.
Okay.
What it does is it relaxes your brain enough that under questioning, any memories that you may have repressed would be realized, and you might come across some revelations.
Feel more free to tell it.
Yep. And your tongue gets loosened a little bit more. But he refused that test as well. The new investigation was definitely looking into that other supposed witness, that Helena Stokely, and she did become a key figure. The thing about her, however, is that she didn't have an alibi for the night of the murders.
Right.
She said she had no memory of where she was because she was under the influence of very heavy drugs. And for some reason, she continues to insert herself in the case and out of the case, and in the case and out of the case, like many times. It's really bizarre.
Really crazy.
She would confess to being there and knowing stuff about it, and then she would recant. And then she would confess and tell somebody else, and then she would recant. And then she would say, I don't know. I mean, she really was just highly not credible.
Yeah.
And her mother even said she had been known to make up stories ever since she was a young teenager.
Right.
Like, she just was not trustworthy. But keep her in mind.
And she was on drugs.
Right. And admittedly, she even said a lot of times she couldn't, her memory was not credible either because of the drugs. But the CID agents did track down and interview all the people that she had named as taking part in the crimes. Each one of them did take a polygraph test, and they passed.
Oh, okay. I don't think I knew that.
And the stories they gave were fact-checked and proven to be true, like their alibis and all of that.
Wow. Okay.
So it did seem like she's just making stuff up.
Right.
And what's more, that original person who had, that William Posey, who had told the defense about her to begin with.
Yes.
He took a polygraph, and that indicated that his testimony was not truthful.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Ladies, I don't know about you, but over the last few years, Melody and I have noticed differences in our skin that have been pretty discouraging. You know, the inevitable signs of aging, fine lines, some wrinkles here and there, dull, dry skin, and sunspots. Thankfully, there's a non-invasive treatment available without having to go under the knife. Tasha Briles at Lakeside Integrative in High Point, North Carolina, offers a total skin package that includes radio frequency microneedling and laser skin resurfacing that can be done right in her office in under an hour. It stimulates collagen growth and elastin that improves the surface and texture of your skin, as well as tightening it. The laser treats acne scars, minimizes large pores, and lessens, if not completely fades, sunspots. Melody and I were blessed to get this treatment in late fall. We're going back for our after photos within a couple of weeks, and we'll be sure to post them on our Facebook group. Melody was just saying how she felt like it gave her a fresh start for her skin routine. It even cleared up some precancerous skin lesions she had, and it faded my sunspots completely as well as brightened and tightened my skin. We're really thrilled with our results. Lakeside Integrative offers an array of other services for men and women, as well as fillers, laser hair removal, weight loss, hormone, and medical treatments. Don't walk, run to the phone and call Lakeside Integrative to set up your appointment at 336-715-0007. Tell them Darlene and Melody from Hard Times and True Crime sent you. Wow, that is so interesting. So I thought the whole time you kind of just had to decide, between him and her. But to me, that just makes my decision a lot easier to know that they tracked down those other people.
Yep. That William Posey, he actually did admit that his testimony that he had given was really based on just assumptions and some fabrications of his own.
Gracious.
I mean, he was on drugs too, probably. So now she's no longer considered a suspect or a credible witness.
Sure. Thankfully.
At this point, Jeff decides to move from New York. He moves to Long Beach, California. Now, again, we're talking about this high achiever. He jumps right back into work full force. And before long, he is the director of a 14-doctor group at St. Mary's Hospital, as well as an instructor at UCLA Med School.
And do they know about his past?
Yes.
That's unbelievable.
And he returned to dating. Not that he ever really stopped.
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, at this point, so I'm going to tell you, much of my information for this episode came from the book Fatal Vision by Joe McGinniss.
Okay.
Remember, Jeff had been shopping for a book deal?
Yes.
Well, he had agreed with McGinniss to write his story, and he thought McGinniss had agreed to write the story that Jeff was giving him. The book turned out to be just the opposite of that.
Really?
Yeah, he thought McGinniss was going to tell his side for him. He gave McGinniss the keys to his apartment to let him have access to all his records, let him stay at his place. He was giving him lots of information.
Wow.
But McGinniss, after being allowed access to his defense records, his defense team, all of that stuff, he's starting to feel like, hey, this guy's guilty.
Yeah.
And in his narrative, in this book, and this book was turned into a TV miniseries too. You can actually see it, Fatal Vision. Jeff is given, somebody smuggled in a tape recorder for him. So he would talk and tell all of this stuff and smuggle it back out to him, and the guy would listen to it. And he wrote that book and had several sections of Jeffrey's own words.
Okay.
And I got to tell you, it is cringy.
I bet.
In Jeffrey's words, he goes into these detailed descriptions of his sexcapades with Colette in this book and with many other women, from college and with Penny Wells. And I mean, it is
weird.
Awkward. You want me to read just one short passage to you?
I got to know what you mean by awkward.
Okay. Here's just one little small section where these are his words about his
wife.
We ended up making love, and I remember it was one of those exquisite times when we were trying to be so incredibly quiet. And it was one of those times that Colette, it was sort of the excitement of doing something, I guess, that we shouldn't have been doing, and in a place where we shouldn't have been doing it, and the threat of Mildred and Freddie walking out at any moment. But it was more exciting than even usual. And she was giving herself to me by coming out of her room and getting in bed with me. And it was the first time.
My gosh.
And
this is before they were married?
Yeah. And it was the first time that this had ever really happened because we had just recently begun making love. And it was incredible, very exciting. We talked about this for years afterwards. In fact, it was one of our most memorable lovemaking sessions.
God, what a weirdo. Who would tell that about their...
I know. Well,
intimate.
There's much more weird stuff. He goes into talking about
it with other women too?
Oh, yes, several. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the other book that I used to research this when I get into it. But most of the information I'm giving you now comes from that book.
Okay.
Although the Army had dismissed charges, the new investigation had revealed much evidence in favor of him being the sole murderer of his family. So with Freddie Kassab pushing and his refusal to let the matter go, a civilian case was brought before a grand jury in late 1974. In a grand jury hearing, there's no defense team present.
Right.
You don't present defense evidence. On January 24th of 1975, MacDonald was indicted for 3 counts of murder again, this time in a civilian court. He was immediately arrested in California, and bail was set at $500,000. But his supporters, including law officers, doctors, nuns, and the like, they rallied around him, testifying once again to his good character, and as a result, his bail was reduced to $100,000. Then, those same supporters pledged enough for him to make bail and be released.
They must have not have seen that same talk show that I saw.
They must not have. He was now able to continue his normal day-to-day stuff. Many backers believed he was just being persecuted and blamed because his father-in-law was pressing the issue, and they wanted to get the father-in-law off their back.
I'm sure, though, that's the story that he presented to them.
Yeah. During this time, Jeff was not idle. I told you he was working in the hospitals and stuff. Mm-hmm. He's buying nice cars and boats, and he is dating plenty of women. At one point, he bragged about sleeping with over 30 women during this time.
Gross.
I know. I mean, being a dirtbag doesn't make you a murderer, but it's still like, ugh.
It's cringe.
It is cringe. Due to legal challenges by the defense, it would take 4 more years before he went to trial.
And he was out that whole time.
He had been released. Finally goes to trial July 1979. So now it's 9 years since his wife and daughters had been murdered. This time at the trial, James Blackburn, a Justice Department attorney, and Brian Murtaugh, his co-counsel, they tried the case. Bill Ivory, who was that initial investigator who maybe made some blunders, he was considered very much a key government witness in the trial. This time, he testified, no, that crime scene had been handled meticulously. He didn't want to admit to any crime scene contamination that he had admitted to in that earlier hearing in 1970. And the jurors didn't ever hear about it because the Article 32 hearing information was not allowed in that trial. Judge Franklin Dupree allowed photographs of the crime scene, which the defense claimed did not represent that scene exactly as it had been before things were moved and stolen. And according to several witnesses, the judge just was kind of on the side of the prosecution, and you could kind of see his bias. Now, another key source I used for this episode was the book Fatal Justice by Jerry Allen Potter and Fred Bost. And their account is very different from that first book I told you about.
Okay.
It was actually written almost to refute that book. And both of these books are very thick.
Okay.
One of the authors, the Fred Bost, he's actually an ex-Army and Pentagon investigator.
Okay.
So I feel like you have to give some weight to what he's written here. I mean, he's not just
credibility.
Yeah. So we're going to walk through some of that evidence from the state's case with the defense's version of what happened.
Okay.
And most of this evidence was brought out, like I told you about it in part 1.
Yes.
But now we're going to go back over it. Also, during this trial, no psychiatric testimony was allowed to be admitted in the trial either.
Okay. Which, I mean, I think that's okay because wasn't it just the defense's
right? So his
psychiatric.
So his defense was not allowed to bring forth that evidence in his trial that he was not somebody who could do that.
I mean, yeah, I guess.
Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm like, I feel like I don't know that I would take it into account anyway because it was his defense that hired them.
But
he should have been allowed.
He should have been allowed to present it. Like
he should have.
Now this was something weird. There was a videotaped hypnosis session that he had submitted to in Beverly Hills. Mm-hmm. It was a hypnotism that took over 6 hours. The tape had been edited down, and the defense, again, this was a defense they hired the person to do this. They wanted to get that admitted into testimony because it showed him reenacting the attacks while he was under hypnosis, where he was fighting for his life, presumably. And if you read the description in Fatal Vision, it was crazy. They said the emotional impact of that hypnosis was overwhelming. One psychiatrist said, well, if he's guilty, he deserves an Academy Award. But the judge did not allow that tape in either.
Really?
Mm-mm. So now the government's theory at this trial is that Jeffrey and his wife had gotten in some kind of an argument that night, that he had fought his wife in Kristen's room after he had beat her in the master bedroom. Maybe he knocked her out, went into the other room where he began killing his daughter, and the wife came to and came in there to defend her, to try to protect her daughter, and he ended up fighting her in there. The blood evidence showed her blood in both rooms. Then they said he probably had wrapped her in a sheet from the bed and moved her back to the master bedroom as if she had never left it, and then finished stabbing her to death there. And during the trial, the prosecution's theme was, things do not lie, but people can and often do. Mm-hmm. And they said that repeatedly throughout the trial, and I do agree with that.
I do too.
However, the defense says if evidence is suppressed, it can make it difficult for things to tell an accurate story.
Yeah.
Depending on how it's presented. And I do agree with that.
I do too.
If something's being suppressed and the jury doesn't hear everything, it can skew the case.
Yeah.
So some of the evidence that the prosecution presented this time was the information about that pajama top. And an FBI lab tech, Paul Stombaugh, he testified some pretty damaging stuff. So there had been 21 cuts in that top.
Mm-hmm.
And he said if you folded that top the way, a certain way,
Right.
that could have accounted for the 48 stab wounds in Colette. The holes lined up.
Ah.
He also said the cuts that were made with that sharp old hickory knife, but the cuts in Jeffrey's clothing were made by the duller and bent bladed Geneva forge knife. Also, no cuts in that pajama top corresponded with the puncture of his lung.
Tell about the punctured lung, because...
Well, this is what I had said to you when we were paused. Keep in mind, his lung was only partially collapsed, and he is a thoracic surgeon.
Right.
So if anybody knows how deeply to cut without being
fatal.
Yeah, he would know.
Right. And he would know how to treat it if it came down to it.
Exactly. And was actually giving instructions on the site when the EMT showed up. He was telling them, I'm going into shock. And if I do this. And if I do,
Yeah.
he was totally in control of that. So keep that in mind for sure. Most damaging of all, Colette's blood was on that top in at least 4 places. And they determined that blood staining had happened before it had been torn. Although he said it had been torn off of him in the living room.
Right.
But her blood was on that. They were able to look at the pattern and stuff and testify that those stains were made before that shirt was torn. So if it was torn off of him, she possibly was the one who did that.
Who did it? That's what I was thinking when they were saying about the scratches, because people don't just lay there and let you kill them.
Right.
They're fighting.
Right. Remember, we talked about him pulling that top off and wrapping it around his arms, and he's saying that he used it to defend himself because he had no defensive wounds on his arms. But that lab tech, Stombaugh, he asserted those holes were not ripped as if you were fighting, but they were perfectly round holes, suggesting that top was stationary during that stabbing.
Like he laid it and...
That would indicate the top was over Colette and not Jeff when it was being punctured. There were 48 holes in that top across the back. You would think that he would have 48 holes in his back to account for that, but he did not.
It seems like almost impossible, actually.
Mm-hmm. The blue threads from that top were found in places of the apartment that he had testified he was in after the shirt was removed. So how'd they get there?
Right.
If the shirt was off, why are the threads from the shirt there?
Exactly.
And some of them, we even said, were found under her body. But we do know, on the flip side of that her body had been moved by one medical examiner, and that he also had pajama pants that had been ripped through the crotch from knee to knee, and those had been thrown away. So they're saying, well, those threads could have come from those pants.
Yeah.
Remember, we talked about how nobody had seen any of the a description matching those 4 intruders. They had looked and called off the search. Well, in fact, military police Kenneth Micah said he had seen someone matching that description. The woman with the blonde hair, the floppy hat, and the boots, standing on the corner near the apartment just after the murders. Neighbors had also seen a group carrying candles walking through the neighborhood that night after midnight. Now,
did they call anybody?
Yes. And people testified, yes, we saw those people in this neighborhood. Now, I do have a theory about that.
Yeah.
If those neighbors had seen those people, he could have seen them as well.
Yeah.
He could have seen those people out there prior, like maybe earlier that evening or sometime during the night.
Right.
And that would have thought that they would, druggy hippies, that might fit my, but that would indicate he had planned it. Unless he got caught up in the heat of the moment, he committed the murders, and then he remembers, like, okay, there are some crazy people out there walking the neighborhood.
And it just struck me, sorry, just real quick, I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say that you said that he was taking diet pills, and those diet pills will make you very agitated, very easily angered, especially the longer, I don't know how long he had been taking them, but it's possible he wasn't actually taking them for a diet if he was a doctor, and that he was taking them as pep pills, and that can make you mean.
Yes.
That can actually make you very mean.
The guy that wrote the book Fatal Vision, that's his theory, is that he went on this rage after he had been taking these diet pills for several weeks, and he was working like 2 or 3 jobs. And so he wasn't sleeping, and he was keeping awake by using those. And after nights and nights of not enough sleep and taking the pills, that is his theory.
Yeah, I mean, I took those, so I know how they can. But I, went through a few years where I took them, and let me tell you, my mood was, my poor kids. That's all I can say. It was a rough time. I did it to keep up with like cleaning my house, and I started it for a diet. And then it was like, oh, wow, I have energy. Like I can literally, my family would go to sleep, and instead of sleeping, I would stay up all night and clean my house spotless. But then I had to get up in the morning and like take care of my kids. So how do you think that went? Well, I had to take more pills. Well, eventually, I mean, it just catches up.
It does.
And you turn into somebody you don't recognize. But so you're like, well, I'm going to stop taking them. But then you can't, because you can't hardly function. So,
well, that's the theory that author is kind of putting forth in his book. Now, I will say, and I didn't read it in great depth, but the other book that refutes it, they really pulled out some stuff about saying that he had not been taking them that long, and they just really tore that theory to shreds.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it's not a true theory. I mean, we don't know what exactly he was taking.
Right. Or how long. Or, I mean, he's a doctor, so he could have had access to things that he didn't have a prescription for.
He did. Actually, quite a bit that was found in the closet in his house.
Okay. So there we go.
And he was like, well, that's just stuff that I use for family and friends when they need help for whatever. But yes, they did find stuff like that. Okay. So we talked about that coffee table sitting on the magazines. And they're saying those magazines would have been scattered, not sitting neatly under it, stacked up. But the defense said, well, he had already said that he was playing games with his daughter earlier in the night, and he moved those magazines to the floor in a stack so she could play games on the coffee table. And there was a picture of the scene that showed her stack of games nearby. And so they're saying maybe they were just stacked there before the table fell over.
Okay.
And in addition to that, you remember we talked about the investigator said they kicked that table 30 different times, and every time it fell on its top, not on its edge.
Yes.
The defense said, we did that same test. We kicked it one time, and it landed on its side.
Really?
Yep.
But is there any proof of those things?
Well, documented, like when they're investigating.
Okay.
And I guess, I guess when the defense brings something like that and they test it, they probably have documented the test, maybe with, I don't know, video or witnesses or whatever, but like it was legit.
Okay.
I will say that book, The Fatal Justice, written by the ex-military Pentagon investigator, every one of their claims, I'm going to get to it in a minute, but they, in the back of their book, footnoted every bit of their evidence where it came from.
Okay.
They were very thorough. This wasn't just stuff they were saying, well, maybe this, maybe that.
Yeah.
No, they had records.
Okay.
Well, there was a hair found in Collette's hand that prosecutors say fit the profile of Jeffrey. But actually, the defense says later, no, that hair in Collette's hand did not match Jeffrey, nor any of the CID agents, nor any of the other family. And so they're saying that proves there was somebody in the house that matched was other than Jeffrey. That's what the defense is saying.
Okay.
The prosecution said there was no evidence of anybody else being in the apartment of the night. Matter of fact, they built a big part of their case on that, proving like there's no proof of anybody else being here. Who else could have done this? There's no proof. There's no fingerprints. There's no blood. There's no hair. But the defense, they challenged that claim, and they said, yes, there was. And I will talk about some of that evidence. I'm going to move on to that in a minute.
Okay.
Just keep that in mind.
Okay.
The real turning point may have been when Jeffrey himself took the stand to testify in his own defense. And, that's not typically a good idea.
No.
But some people are so convinced that they can convince a jury that they'll take the stand. And he did, and it did not play well.
Okay.
Again, because, he comes across as like, super cocky and arrogant.
I'm surprised he didn't defend himself.
I know. Even though he did not defend himself, he did a lot of the work on his own behalf. I will tell you that.
Okay.
But one juror said they were convinced he was innocent until he got up there and spoke for himself.
Wow.
Things had started out pretty good for the defense because they were poking all those holes in the prosecution's.
Even I was thinking.
Yeah. So now the tide's starting to turn back a little bit away from him.
Okay.
When the defense called numerous character witnesses to the stand on behalf of Jeffrey to testify of his good character. The prosecution, they got their chance to just cross-examine them, and every time they would ask the same question. Were you in the apartment at 544 Castle Drive on February 17, 1970? And when each one said no, they would say, no further questions.
Wow.
They weren't there. I mean, that made quite an impact.
Yeah.
That was kind of a good strategy.
It was a very good one.
And then there's some rather interesting courtroom theatrics.
Okay.
At one point, one of the prosecution team pulled out the blue pajama top similar to the one MacDonald had worn on that night.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrapped it around his arm, while another one of the team pulled out an ice pick and began attacking him, while he used that blue top to kind of deflect the blows. And then one blow got him, and he was cut. They were like making a point, like he would have had some on his arms.
Yes.
But that defense attorney, he didn't miss a beat. He quickly got to his feet and pointed to his client while asking the prosecution, do you need a doctor? Because, he's a doctor.
Right.
I mean, it was a scene, and there was laughing in the courtroom and snickering from the jury. But that prosecution had made a big indention in the minds of the jury with that.
Yeah.
They could see plainly when he held that top up, the holes were not cylinders. They were jagged, they were torn, and he did not escape one wound. They did question, well, why didn't Jeffrey MacDonald, if you got 3 men attacking you, how are you not having any defensive wounds?
Right.
And then they presented the witchcraft, drug-crazed hippie angle. Helena Stokely took the stand, and then she lied on the stand.
Oh, okay.
She denied...
Doesn't surprise me.
I know. She denied ever having been committed to a mental institution. She had been.
Mm-hmm.
She denied knowing anything that had happened in the apartment that night, although 6 people there testified she had told them at various times she had been there. And now she doesn't remember anything. And her own mother told the defense that she would talk and tell them a bunch of nonsense. And I've already established her story just went back and forth numerous times, and nobody knew which version is the truth here. But on cross-examination, she did say she had not been wearing her blonde wig that night. And that was after saying she didn't remember anything about the night.
My gosh.
And before that week was over, she told an attorney that she didn't think she was there that night. She knew she had some type of memory of a hobby horse in Kristen's bedroom. When she was asked if she felt guilt about her involvement, she said, yes, why do you think I've taken drugs all these years? Then the defense attorney tried to get her back on the stand with those new admissions of guilt.
Yeah.
And the judge, he's not allowing it. And I don't blame him for that.
Right.
He said, this was kind of funny. She had actually called him, the judge, twice that weekend, telling him she was in mortal dread of Bernie Siegel and wanted a lawyer to represent her.
Oh my gosh. And that was the defense?
The defense, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I wondered if they were not manipulating her or paying her or something.
It does sound like they were manipulating her.
Yeah.
Although they say that the prosecution just didn't do their job to really question her well, and they tried to kind of hide her and brush her under the rug, and they were just doing their job thoroughly because there was just a lot of evidence that she was there. But she's gone back and forth so many times. At one point, she does try to get them to give her immunity if she'll testify. And when they won't give her immunity, she won't testify. She just gets up there and says, no, I don't remember. I did watch some interviews with her, actually, that she did. And she was, out
Nutty.
there.
Okay.
During the prosecution's closing arguments, Jim Blackburn reminded the jury of the numerous character witnesses brought forth for Jeffrey MacDonald. And then he said, but don't ever forget that perhaps the greatest crime of all was committed 2,000 years ago. And the night before Christ was betrayed, Judas Iscariot would have had 12 of the best character witnesses this world has ever known to have said that he didn't do it.
Wow.
But he went on to say, and they would have said he couldn't have done it, but we know that he did.
I was thinking that, because last night, a really good friend of mine gave her testimony at church last night, and her basically the whole topic of her testimony was, I played church really well for years. She did a lot of work in our church, and she was always at the forefront. She said her life revolved around church, and yet she lived a complete double life. And our assistant pastor was saying, we would have never known. You can fool people.
Right. After just 6.5 hours of deliberation, a verdict had been made. As the jurors walked back into the courtroom, the defense, who had minutes before been pretty confident that Jeffrey was going to be acquitted, suddenly felt fear. As they entered with tears on their faces, everyone knew what the verdict was. Jeffrey MacDonald was found guilty of second-degree murder of Colette and Kimberly and first-degree murder in the death of little Kristen, because they believed he had killed her just to do away with any witnesses to the crime. That, like, he may have gotten carried away with his wife after an argument. Kimberly came in and found him, so he may even accidentally have hit her in the attack and then had to kill her. But Kristen, the 2.5-year-old, was just there, and that it was a calculated act, is what
and
they're
they
saying.
found him guilty.
Yes.
Okay.
He was given 3 life terms, concurrent, not consecutive. And at this point, the death penalty was not applicable under federal law in North Carolina.
Okay.
The author of Fatal Vision shared 2 stories about MacDonald that were rather eye-opening in the wake of that decision. He recounted a road trip that Jeffrey had made in the summer of 71, so the summer after, like a year and a half after the murders.
Mm-hmm.
He drove from New York to California, and he was accompanied by a 16-year-old girl who was the daughter of some of his good friends.
Mm-hmm.
They thought the trip would be a good adventure for her. The author of the book claims that what the parents did not know is that throughout that whole trip, MacDonald was having sex with this minor. Yeah.
Wow.
So I think he should be in prison for that,
Yes.
whether he did the murders or not. The other story happened shortly after Jeff arrived in California. And so that would have been still the early 70s.
Yeah.
And he met up with a woman that he had known for years. In fact, it was a friend of his mother's. But they started up a sexual relationship. And she had a 10-year-old son. And once while they were visiting Jeff, the boy did something that made him mad. And so he carried him outside to the dock because he had his boat out there and dangled him by his feet over the water in a threatening way.
What?
Yeah. Which again shows a little bit of that
weird.
temper that can come out.
Yes.
Then another time, they had been on Jeff's boat together, and the boy did something again that had angered him. And he had threatened him when they got back to the dock that he was going to hold his head over the boat and crush his skull against the dock.
Oh my gosh.
That boy, even as an adult, when he got older, he said he had been terrified.
God.
He said he never would forget the look in his eyes when he had said that to him.
Wow.
And he said he felt those murder accusations were true.
I'm sure.
But he did tell his mom about it, and thank God she ended that affair. MacDonald has never given up trying to have the conviction overturned. He's filed numerous appeals. The case has gone to the Supreme Court twice. He has submitted multiple requests for a writ of habeas corpus. And in those appeals, his defense team states that the prosecution withheld pertinent evidence that could have cleared him of those murders. And if that's the case, then he didn't get a fair trial. So the following information, just to follow up with some of that, came from the Fatal Justice book. MacDonald himself had hired a private detective to try to help find evidence that would clear his name.
Mm-hmm.
Years later, after the Freedom of Information Act went through, they were able to request some of those records they had not had access to before. And they said they found scores of evidence that the defense had never been given for his trial. So they were never given the original lab notes that were written about key pieces of evidence. Once the lab notes were received, there was a lot of information that had been left out of the typed notes that they had received. A piece of skin under Colette's fingernail that had been found, they didn't know about it, and it disappeared after Bill Ivory had examined it.
Okay.
The Army never reported that loss, and Ivory's partner claimed that photos were taken of it, but none ever showed up.
Wow.
And they said that the Army, when they opened a second investigation in 1971, that they knew that missing skin weakened their case. And it was only then that Ivory's partner made the claim that he had seen a 5-inch diagonal scratch on MacDonald's chest at the time of the murders.
Oh my God. Okay. So, and is there documentation of that?
No, he mentioned it later, when the information about the skin under the fingernail came out.
Okay.
Then he said he had seen a scratch on MacDonald that night, as if to say that skin was from her.
Okay.
But they never brought that up before. and didn't tell about the skin under the fingernail, which could have indicated someone else. The doctor who had treated him at that time, he said there was not a scratch, and he had made diagrams of all the wounds.
Okay, yeah.
This was another thing. A few black wool fibers had been found on Colette's body and on the club. The defense were not given these. And a government forensic expert had done some exams on them, and they stated that they did not match any clothing or fabric in the MacDonald household or anything belonging to Jeffrey, thereby suggesting intruders had been in the home. And MacDonald's lawyers said they were never told of those findings. Okay. And I will say, those footnotes in that book I told you about, every one of those were gathered from that Freedom of Information Act, and they are official documents.
Okay.
They are official witness testimony. They are official lab notes. I mean, it was
So
a lot.
legit.
It was legit. At this point, I did start thinking, well,
Right.
what? I mean, he is arrogant. He is a narcissist. He is kind of a
Cringy.
dirtbag,
Yeah.
but he still
Did he get a fair
may not have
trial?
gotten a fair trial. William Ivory, the investigator, Bernie Siegel got him to admit on the stand that he knew Stokely was an informant. He knew about her attire of the floppy hat, boots, and wig. He knew she did drugs and all the cult-like witchcraft things. He knew she didn't have an alibi for that night. He had a lot of reason to suspect her, and he had ignored all of that and did not question her until she came up on the defense's side and they had to.
Okay.
Here's another interesting thing. Long blonde hairs had been found in a hairbrush in their utility room near where Jeffrey said that female intruder had been standing. That was never disclosed to the defense, and it was found that those hairs were determined to be synthetic hairs, like from a wig.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah. And the defense were saying, that could have been an intruder. But the prosecution said it's more likely that those were from a baby doll. Like, what intruder's going to stand there and brush your hair in your laundry room or your utility room? But still,
Yeah.
they should have been given, if they weren't worried about it, they should have given the evidence over. And it
Yeah.
does show that they were covering some stuff up.
Right.
And I don't just blindly trust my government to be truthful.
No.
Also, he had said she was holding a candle.
Yes.
3 wax drippings were found in the apartment, and none of them matched the chemical makeup of any of the other 14 candles that were in the apartment. And some of that drop was in the little girl's bedroom.
I don't know though. I know a thing or two about candles.
Oh, yes, you do.
And-
give us your expert advice. I want to hear this.
And I feel like it would probably, if it was I guess it depends on what, but I'm thinking of the long candles, the drip candles.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have dripped more than
Then just a few
few times. Yeah.
Okay. And so this is my plug for Lucy Faye Candle Company. If you're local, you can check them out because Darlene makes some awesome candles.
Thank you.
Here's an interesting thing. Military police, that Kenneth Micah, who said he saw that woman in the floppy hat that night, right, like 22 minutes after McDonald's call for help. He said he saw him near the apartment on the corner. He never mentioned that in the Article 32 hearing. And he said it bothered him because he had been told not to volunteer that information to the defense team, only say it if he was directly questioned. So he ended up going back to the defense lawyer and telling him about it because it bothered his conscience that he had never said anything. Siegel put him on the stand and he did testify about it, even though he said the prosecution had ordered him not to. So that's definitely like, ooh, not good.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the Kassabs. They had adamantly stood by him for a long time till the TV interviews and all of that. In the book and in the TV miniseries, they present that the Kassabs had their change of heart after he lied to them about killing one of the murderers, and they found that out. But government records show that in reality, they continued to support him for 5 months after they knew the truth about that lie, as well as after they had read the Article 32 transcript. They still supported him for like 5 more months. And a friend of both families, she said she had attended a dinner party for MacDonald before he left to go to California. And she said that their support of him had started waning when they couldn't persuade him to stay on the East Coast near them. Yeah, that's not that strong of evidence. It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
Okay, back to Helena, just one more thing. The Freedom of Information Act had brought forth some evidence that Helena did not officially fully recant her confession.
Okay.
They said in 1981 she had signed a statement saying the previous statements she had made were basically accurate. She just wasn't positive they had happened or if it was something she had dreamed up, but it possibly could have happened. And because she was under the influence of drugs. And the fact that she couldn't readily say for sure, she herself said she had never seen a bigger mockery made of justice or an investigation made into such a shambles. And she said, I'll never again talk to the FBI. But then she turned around and did 2 interviews on TV in which she repeated the confessions. That was on 60 Minutes, which was never aired, and then Jack Anderson interview show that aired on September 1982.
Yeah, I just think she's just not credible at all.
Not at all. But her boyfriend at the time of the murders was named Greg Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he went by the name Jim because, I mean, you know, he's a druggie. He has to change the name up a little bit, like, so he doesn't get caught. So sometimes he went by Jim. 2 people testified that he had confessed to them that he had taken part in the murders that night with the group that Helena was with. And he had said it to another man at a party. It was reported to the FBI and never followed up on. Again, you have this evidence. You have the defense who kind of can rebut some of that evidence. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of stuff that was not allowed at trial that probably should have been, that could have pointed to intruders being there.
Right.
And even though Stokely was not credible, this Greg Mitchell, I mean, maybe he was. We don't know. He was a druggie too, but I mean, we just don't know.
Right.
In 2002, MacDonald remarried. In 2017, he said if getting out required for him to state a falsehood, admitting to committing the murders, then he would never get out and he would never go home because he will not confess to something he didn't do. James Blackburn, who had made the closing arguments for the prosecution, he was one of the lead prosecutors in the case. He later went on to plead guilty himself of forging some court documents that were not related to this case, but embezzlement and fraud as well.
Prosecutor?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he was disbarred.
Okay.
So now you have to wonder, like, if that gives credibility to the fact that they were withholding stuff from the defense.
Right.
If you're going to forge other documents and do those kinds of things, surely you can.
Yeah.
Jeffrey MacDonald is currently in prison in Cumberland, Maryland. His case is said to be the most litigated murder case in U.S. history. He has filed numerous unsuccessful challenges to his murder convictions, which have been repeatedly rejected by federal courts at every level. His latest appeal stemmed from a motion that he filed in November of 2020, requesting that the court grant him compassionate release and reduce his life sentences. The United States vigorously opposed the motion in briefing and at a hearing held March 2021. So, do you think Jeffrey MacDonald is guilty?
Yes, I think he's guilty, but I don't know that the defense proved his guilt beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt. I do think he's guilty. I definitely think he killed all 3 of them, but I don't know that he should be in prison. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like him.
Right.
You know.
I also think he's guilty, but I will say, when I started reading that second book, the amount of stuff brought forth that was kept from the defense made me really question, like, could that have been? Maybe there was somebody else there. It doesn't seem likely to me.
Right.
And his story just doesn't add up.
No.
And there just are a lot of things. I think he's guilty.
Yeah. And I think there was a lot of physical evidence that proved his guilt.
Yes.
But I don't know that I don't think he got a fair trial.
He didn't get a fair trial.
If the defense is telling the truth in that book, and you said there's a ton of documentation. Mm-hmm. So if that's all true, I don't always trust a lot of testimony. Like when people come back and are like, well, I should have said, you know what I mean? Yes. Or I didn't say this at the time, but I typically just throw all that stuff out. But the other things, I guess, like the physical evidence stuff and just knowing how contaminated the crime scene was, I don't know that he got, I don't know that he had a fair trial.
Yeah, I don't think he did have a fair trial because that book had me questioning. I mean, it really had me questioning, like, well, maybe he really didn't do it. But at the end of the day, I came back around to he did it.
Yeah.
But there's enough here. If that had been presented and I was on a jury, I would not have convicted him.
That's what I'm thinking. I don't know that he should have been convicted.
Whether he deserves it or not. And I don't trust that the government is always going to give us the truth.
No,
they will hide stuff. And I don't just trust them blindly. Just because the government said he did it does not make me believe he did it.
No, I agree.
I agree with you about the evidence. It can't be just about the testimony. And there was a lot of compelling evidence about that crime scene.
Yeah.
Even though there was a lot that was compromised.
Right.
Well, while this episode focused solely on Jeffrey MacDonald and the whole legal proceedings against him, I just want to leave on a note that reminds us that 3 innocent people died that night in 1970. Well, actually 4, because Colette was pregnant with their son as well. At the autopsy, they figured out it was a boy. And so 4 people died. And it's always tragic when children die.
Yeah.
More so when it's in such a brutal way. But if MacDonald killed his wife and children, those precious little girls, that is really what would make this the most tragic of all.
Yes. Yeah. Those sure were some hard times.
They sure were.
Believe it or not, there's a fairly large group of people that hear this story and think Mr. MacDonald is innocent. But I know exactly who did it. And I have a fail-proof method for solving murders. All you have to do is figure out who the killer is, and you'll have your man every time. So you make sure you keep listening to Hard Times and True Crimes and picking up these little nuggets of information that you can use to impress your friends. And you make sure you tell everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.